afternoon, everyone. As you heard, my name is Thomas Michel. I'm from the United States, and you might have noticed that I am a Christian. I'm actually a Catholic priest. And we were asked in this afternoon session not to read our papers, but to talk to you. And that's exactly what I was hoping to do. I want to tell you how I, as a Christian, came to know the Risale Nur. And I want to tell you about what it was that attracted me to learn more about the Risale Nur. And then I want to tell you something about what I have learned in the course of the time that I have been studying the Risale Nur. And finally say something about why you also might learn something from studying and reading the Risale Nur. Well, my story with the Risale Nur began back in 1985. I was teaching Christian theology in Rome, and we signed an academic agreement with the theology faculties in Turkey. And I went to Ankara, Turkey, to begin teaching. There, some of my students were students of the Risale Nur. And they said to me, "Have you ever read anything about the Risale Nur?" I said, "No, I didn't even know who Sayyid Nursi was." Remember, in 1985, not much of the Risale Nur had ever been translated into English. But there were some short little passages, little booklets, and I began to read them together with my students. And several things right away attracted me to learn more about the Risale Nur. One of the things is, long before other people were talking about it, Sayyid Nursi saw the need for Muslims and Christians to be united, to give our world a witness to values that come from the Word of God. He said, in the world that we live in, there's aggressive forms of atheism. In those days, there were the Nazis in Germany, there were the communists in Russia and many other places. There were secular people who, like in the West, who were not interested at all in anything to do with God, and maybe even against the whole idea of God. He said, because of this aggressive atheism that's going on, people who believe in God and want to do God's will, they have to be united. Now, he wasn't talking just about a strategic alliance with all kinds of good and bad Christians. He says Muslims have to unite with the truly pious and spiritual Christians. Those were the words he used. He said Muslims have to be united with the pious and spiritual Christians. That we together have to stop our arguments, at least for the time being. We have to see one another as brothers so that we can offer the world something that it wouldn't have otherwise. A witness to God's will and the way God wants us to live. So I found this really a fascinating idea, and it made me want to learn more about what Sayyid Nursi had to say in the Risale Nur. Now, another thing that attracted me, a second idea, was Sayyid Nursi's rejection of violence. You might remember, if you read his life, that as a young man, he was in a cavalry militia, riding their horses, because the Russians had come down and were invading his homeland of Turkey. And so he was fighting to get them out of Turkey. He was captured and even brought to prisoner of war camp. But later on, he came to the realization that the days of the jihad of the sword are over, he says. He says, now, in modern times, the way we have to do jihad is with the pen, is with the word. He said we have to convince people. We have to persuade people. We have to use rational argument. And I like this aspect too. And this made me want to know more about the Risale-i Nur. Sayyid Nursi was convinced of the primacy of love in Islam. He said in one of his writings, that which is most worthy of loving is love. And that which is most worthy of our enmity is enmity. In other words, he says, if you want to be a real Muslim, you've got to love loving. And you've got to hate hatred. You've got to really put the emphasis on loving and love. Well, these were three ideas that really made me want to read more and more about the Risale-i Nur. And I have been doing that now for, well, 1986, 96, 06. So about 22 years, I guess. 25 years, whatever. And I couldn't begin to do justice to all the things that I have learned in these 25 years reading the Risale-i Nur. You know, it's really large. It's 6,000 pages. And Sayyid Nursi has special little treatises for young people, for old people. I find myself reading a part about the old people more and more these years, because I'm getting old myself. But he has another one for the sick. He's got a special thing to read when you're sick. Now, I had a bypass about 10 years ago, and when I was in the hospital, one of my friends brought me from the Risale-i Nur, Sayyid Nursi's writings for the sick. And I read that, and he's asking the person who's sick to reflect that this isn't all bad. You know, when you're sick, you're feeling useless. You're feeling you can't do anything. You're bored, laying in a bed day after day. And Sayyid Nursi said, there's really a good opportunity here. There's the opportunity to learn more what all of God's blessings for you. There's the opportunity to think about death and maybe change your bad habits. He gives many ways in which health or sickness can be something good in our lives. He has another treatise for prisoners. You'll remember that Sayyid Nursi himself was in prison. And you know what he called prison? He called it the school of Yusuf, the school of the prophet Joseph. Why? Because Joseph was in prison and he learned a lot during that time. And he learned, among other things, how God protected him, how God guided him, and how God saved him when he was in prison. So he called prison itself a school of Joseph. Well, these are some of the treatises. One of the things that Sayyid Nursi was really concerned about was that many people in his time stopped believing in life after death. They said, well, it's not scientific. We can't prove it. We can't prove that when you die, God's going to bring you back to life. They say we don't see any evidence in animals. An animal dies and it's dead animal. And it's going to be the same with us. And Sayyid Nursi said, no, it's really important that we all believe that this world is just kind of a stopping off place. He says it's like a bus station. We're here for a while, and then we're going somewhere else. And he uses very many arguments to show us that this life that we have here now is kind of a proving ground, a waiting place for our real eternal life that God has waiting for us. This was one of his beautiful ideas. And he came up with a really interesting argument. That argument is winter. Now, you don't experience this very much in Kerala because you're very blessed. You have green all year round. But in Washington, where I live, or in Turkey, where Sayyid Nursi lived, every year around October, November, all the leaves fall off of the trees and the fruits dry up and it gets really cold and the snow comes down and everything seems dead. And then it comes around time to March or April. In this dead land that had nothing growing on it for months and months starts coming alive. Starts coming alive with thousands, hundreds of thousands of plants, different kinds of plants. And here you see a plant with small blue flowers. Next to it is one with yellow flowers. And Sayyid Nursi says, last year, this one was also producing blue flowers, and this one next to it, yellow flowers. And yet they both seemed dead for winter, and now in springtime, they've come alive. And he says, that's the way our lives are. Seems like we die, but the same God who brings life to the world after the winter will bring life to humans. So I think those of you who are going to be teachers of Islam, you want to be religion teachers or you want to be imams, I think you can learn a lot from Sayyid Nursi by the way he teaches. It's not all theoretical, but he takes examples from the world around us and the life around us. Well, this was another thing that I learned from Sayyid Nursi. One more is he looks at the world around us. He looks at the sky and the sun and the clouds and the mountains and the rivers. And he says, all of these are manifestations of God's own qualities, of God's own nature. Well, what does he mean by that? Well, we look at the rain, and this is a manifestation of God's quality of mercy. God sends the rain, and our fields come alive and grows our food. God sends the sun, and it keeps us warm. God sends the mountains, and we don't get lost. All of these things, he takes his starting point, as always, from the Quran itself. Whereas in the Quran we find it says, there are so many signs of God's mercy, God's power, God's love, God's care, but most people are not paying attention. And that's why we heard Faris Bey in the early talk this morning. He's talking about tafakkur. Sayyid Nursi says we have to do tafakkur. We have to reflect. We have to think about what we find in nature. We have to let nature speak to us. He says that it's like another Quran. It's God's message. But most of us, our eyes are closed. We're not noticing it. So these are some of the things that I wanted to talk to you about. But I do want to, before I finish, underline with one thing, because this is very important. Sayyid Nursi says, who are the enemies of Muslims? Who are Muslims' enemies? Is it this group of people? Or is it that group of people? Or is it that group of people over there? He says, no, that's not it. He said, the real enemies are three. They're ignorance. People are ignorant. They're not well informed. They haven't thought things through. The second is poverty. People are poor. They're physically poor. They're spiritually poor. And this poverty makes their lives hard and rough, and it makes them sometimes be rough to others. And he says there's a third enemy, and the third enemy is disunity. We're not united. We're not one. He said what we have to do is we have to fight these enemies. We have to fight them with hard work. We have to fight them with knowledge. We have to fight them by working for unity. And so I think my time is up, but these are some of the things that I wanted to share with you that I have learned over the years from the Risale-i-Nur, and I hope that as you read more and more in the Risale-i-Nur, you'll learn some of these things as well. Thank you.